we on? Ooh. Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in a couple minutes. If you wouldn't mind taking your seats, please. I'll just give you a minute or two to do that and get settled in. So quiet. Wow. I feel like a teacher. All right. Great to see you all. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you had a great holiday season and feeling rested and refreshed for 2025. I am. I just got back from Alberta, and it's like minus 20 there right now, so this is kind of nice for me. I feel like I'm in the tropics almost, but maybe not quite. But yeah, before we introduce our speaker tonight, I just want to go through the usual run of house like we do. It's been a couple months since I've been here, so it's great to be back and see you all again. If you don't know me, my name is Rachel Jones. I'm the president of the Hamilton Naturalist Club, so I am happy to be your MC or host tonight. And if you have any questions afterwards, I'm happy to chat, to answer, and anything else that you have. So without further ado, I'm going to get into some announcements for us here with the HNC. Once again, Happy New Year. Really looking forward to seeing what this year brings for the club. It's going to be a bit of a strategic year for us. There's a lot of planning going on in the background, a lot of reworking some of our programs, some of our terms of references for different things. And of course, we have the Biodiversity Action Plan too, which is going to be in full swing this year. So it's going to be the year of the volunteer. I know that we rely on you and our volunteers so much already, but there's so much more that we're going to be planning and focusing on to get everybody involved and give everybody more of a voice and a say in how we direct the next 100 years of this club even too. So expect that if you subscribe to the Wood Duck, our newsletters and things, you're going to see a lot coming down the pipeline in the next couple months about how we can use your advice and your feedback and your opinions on building some of those things over the coming months and years. So really excited about that. We've got some exciting things in the news as well. The natural areas inventory has been in the news recently. Hamilton Spectator, CHCH picked it up as well. And I put a couple quotes in here. If you do go to the article, this is what you'll see. So with the NAI, Paul O'Hara, I don't know if he's here tonight. Paul, are you here anywhere? Maybe not. Well, he's been a busy guy. He's completed his survey of the 11 urban natural areas in Hamilton. And unfortunately, I'm preaching to the choir here. We all know that is in severe decline. There's a lot of things that we need to work on, and a lot of what we address in the Biodiversity Action Plan too is kind of part of that. So if you haven't seen those articles, or if you're not sure what I'm talking about, lots of resources online at hamiltonnature.org, or again, any one of us, if you want to speak to us afterwards and get more information about that, happy to do so. Brian McHattie here, you've been a driving force in that NAI project as well too, so thank you for all that hard work. So it's great to see news picking it up and getting some steam and largely positive comments in our favor. You know, you never want to read the comments section, but when it's a lot of like-minded people like us, it only helps our cause even further, right? So that's been great. The barn swallow nesting shed at Johnson 2 Park is now complete. So Glenn Meldrum, is Glenn here tonight? I haven't seen him. If you don't know Glenn, he's been putting a lot of work up at Johnson 2 Park with these structures too. So that was also in the news, and that's a quote too of how excited he is to see how they're going to react to this nesting shed. So if you haven't been up there to check it out, it's really cool. I suggest you do so. Take a little walk around. It's a really nice park as well. So excited to see how that comes about in the spring and summer too. Green Venture, I just want to mention, they were going to be here tonight to do a presentation and talk to you about Rain Ready Hamilton, which is a new rebate program that they have for the city and homeowners, but they had to, I think there was just a few loose ends that need to be tied up with that with the city that they can't necessarily discuss yet. So they're going to be back on our next monthly meeting, February 10th, to just take a few minutes before our speaker just to discuss what those rebates are. And if you have questions, I think there's some things online already that you can look up if you just Google Rain Ready Hamilton. So take a look at that and sort of come with your questions ready if you have any for the next meeting. So that'll be good to hear from them. So those are the announcements right now. Volunteer opportunities, I do this every month, but we're always looking for writers for our Wood Duck. That's our publication that comes out every month. Now that the mail is back, you should be getting those in the mail. I know I got a double back-to-back issue a couple weeks ago, so it was great to see those back in circulation. So if you have anything that you want to share, if you have a story, if you have photos, we're always looking for pictures as well, so we'd love to feature it. So Carolyn Zanketta, I think she's here. I know you're here. There you are. And Helen Powers are our editors of the Wood Duck now. So if you have any questions, Carolyn's here, not to put you on the spot, but and Helen's here too? Where are you, Helen? I didn't see you yet. Hey, there we go. So we got two right here in the audience. So if you have questions about what that process is like, what the deadlines are, you can talk to them, or you can just wait till later and send an email too. And anybody that's watching at home, we live stream now. Thank you, Rob. Back online, which is great. So if you have questions, I think you can drop those in the chat too. Are you taking a look at that? Awesome. So questions in the chat, always welcome. And if you can't get them here and now virtually, then again, there's always somebody an email away that'll be happy to help. So that's the Wood Duck. Field events, we have Peter here as well. Where's Peter? Raise your hand. There we go. If you have any ideas for a walk or any sort of general interest, or if you have something that you want to see more of and you want to just give us your ideas or opinions, he's the one to talk to. So Peter is happy to help. And again, if you want to send him an email after this too, it's events@hamiltonnature.org. So we have a few coming up. I'll get to those in a second. Board of Directors. So again, I mentioned at the beginning that we're going through a lot of different reorganization, not necessarily reorganization, but just trying to see how we can expand our programs, our committees and things to better serve our members, better serve nature in general too. So one of the things that we want to add to our board, which we didn't have before, is a grants and fundraising director. So if you know somebody, I'm looking at Sheila in the back, she knows how to connect with that fundraising. I see you out there. She's hiding now. But we're always looking for people that have those connections, or if you're, savvy with grant writing and want to do it as a volunteer, I know that's sort of a unicorn to ask for, but we could always use that sort of help. So grants and fundraising is definitely one that we're looking for. Sanctuary director as well. We're sort of reviewing that right now. That was one of the things I mentioned with committees. We're looking at our terms and reference, working with the sanctuary committee, our staff, and our board to sort of come up with what that looks like going forward, how we can integrate more of our volunteer opportunities into that. So if you have questions, there's a lot of the sanctuary committee is here tonight. Great to see you all. Happy New Year. And you can talk to any one of us afterwards if you have more questions about that. But we're hoping to have that posting in the next couple weeks available. So if you want to learn more about what that entails and how you can help, we'll have more information in the coming month or two. So Director at Large also is a vacant position right now, so that's more of just a general support to the board, strategic oversight. So if you want to kind of dip your toes in and you're not sure where you fit in the club or what that looks like or where you might want to use some of your skills, that's a really great sort of launch pad position to start with as a director. So encourage all people to come ask questions, get involved, and don't be afraid, don't be shy. We're a great group and looking forward to expanding that even more. So like I said, it's going to be the year of the volunteer. Charlie's here, our volunteer director, so if you've got questions about that, he's our guy. And if you just kind of want to learn more about how to get involved too, our website, our social media is a great resource for that. So lots to do this year, lots to do to get involved. If you like boots on the ground stuff, if you like writing, leading, speaking, there's always something to do, and we could use your help and with open arms too. So great to see you all here tonight. This is a great crowd already. So yeah, happy to kick off the year in a good way. We've got some great events coming up. The winter tour of Hazeland Swamp. It won't look like that. It'll look like that, but frozen. So we recommend ice spikes for this one. It is a weather-dependent event. That's going to be on Saturday, January 25th, 10 a.m. to noon. So if you want to reserve a spot for that, or if you want more information, you can talk to Jen. I think she's streaming online tonight. So hi, Jen, from home. land@hamiltonnature.org if you've got questions or want to sign up for that, which I encourage you to do because we never really know how many people are going to be in these groups, so it's always great to get a sense of the kind of numbers we're expecting. So Yeah, and this is great. So I think it was this time last year that we were talking to you about Hazeland Swamp and asking for your donations to expand that an extra 50 acres last winter. So we've got it. It's exciting. It's 100 now, so strap on your spikes and come take a walk on the frozen swamp and learn a little bit more about what kind of stewardship work we're doing and what we're planning over the year. So that's on the 25th. On the 26th, we have a winter tree ID walk, so that is 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. at the RBG Arboretum. We're meeting at the pavilion by the parking lot, so it is paid parking unless you're a member. But we're going to have RBG's Nadia Kavalin and friends identifying trees only by the buds, bark, and branches, so that's pretty cool. And then, of course, the Wheelo IBA survey, that's second Saturday monthly, so the next one for that, I think it just happened this past Saturday, so February 8th is going to be the next one for that bird survey. Lots on the go for the winter, which is great. CD Saturday, I think this is the 14th annual. This is the place to be if you're a gardener or if you're just learning or any sort of horticulture, if you want to swap seeds, share ideas on backyard gardening, and who knows, you might get some inspiration from our talk tonight about how you can do things in an urban landscape too. So come out Saturday, February 1st. We're going to have representation there for HNC. We're going to be talking about our Butterfly Way project, I believe. And Sheila, are you bringing seeds for that one? Are you going to be at that one too? Yeah. Nice. Awesome.
We will bring leftover seeds, if we have any, to the meeting after February 1st.
Awesome. Thanks. That's awesome, Sheila. So that would be...
Something in particular, you can send me an email via Jen.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. I got a wish list. Thanks for the reminder. So again, that's Saturday, February 1st. So come out. That is a Green Ventures event we're supporting and having a table. So going to be lots of great organizations and vendors and everything else there. So check it out. Even if you're not much of a gardener, it's still great to network and be part of that community. So always a great event. And that's for those external events. Of course, we have our bird study group. And Monday, January 20th, so next week, we have Convergent Flyways, or Flyways Divergent Perspectives. So we have Shay Smith coming to speak about a birdtographer. I like that. It's really funny. And even his Instagram is like suburbirder. I had to say that in my head a few times. But if you can't make it again, we're live streaming now, so feel free to join online if you want to stay cozy at home. I know it's hard to get out in this kind of a weather, but I'm really surprised to see so many of you made the trip tonight, so I appreciate that. So next monthly meeting after this, and this is the one that Sheila's talking about, where we're going to have leftover seeds too. So Monday, February 10th, kind of fitting that it's going to be about native bees, so the pollinator theme kind of works nicely for that one. We're going to have Dr. Susan Dudley here to discuss native bees. I don't have too much more information beyond that, but keep an eye on our website, Wood Duck, newsletter, our social media, and you'll get the information that you need. So about our speaker, without further ado, I have Dr. Elli Papangelakis. Did I say it right? Yes. Oh, nailed it. I did it in my head so many times before I came over. She's an assistant professor and the Fairleigh Gadsby Research Chair in Fluvial Geomorphology in the School of Earth, Environment, and Society at McMaster University. And if you think that's an intimidating title, try saying it out loud. I had to practice in the mirror before I came here tonight. Her research focus is in fluvial geomorphology and more specifically in how human activities such as urbanization affect river environments. She's interested in developing and testing new science-based river restoration techniques and river management tools. And as a freshwater geek working for Fisheries and Oceans, I'm really excited, selfishly, to welcome here tonight to speak to our audience. So, Dr. Elli Papangelakis, everybody. Thank you. We just got to do a bit of a changeover, so give us 1 second here. Look at that. And here's the little clicker. I'll get out of your way here.
Sorry, where does...
That goes on your laptop. Pretend you see nothing. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. This should go here, and then right in there, it's like connect to connect. I know. It's new age stuff. Tell ya. So, do you need this clicker? Or you want to just use your...
I think I'll be okay.
Okay. That's good. All right, I got it. All right, so, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, there? Do you see anything on your screen over there? Or should it go, you don't
It
have
went
one of
into
those things, eh?
presentation mode on the computer.
Oh, it's screen mirroring, I think, too, is like a thing. Give us a second here, guys, sorry. Do you have, I'm gonna let the tech people do the tech stuff, and just, I need the hook here.
Sorry, I'm in screen mirroring, but. Might be helpful. Start. Pressing click on start. That's not
Would it help if this went in somewhere?
I don't have another USB.
Oh, I see.
Actually,
Well, if you need to troubleshoot.
hold on, sorry.
Feel free to talk amongst yourselves, sing some songs if you wish. Should have brought a guitar.
I'm not a geeky person, but I just read it. It says click on start, and it looks like you have to push a button on that, on this thing.
We tried it, but it doesn't.
Okay, sorry. That's what I thought.
Okay. I gotta get over. It should be. Use presenter. Should be it. I'm not sure what to do from here. I can maybe pull it up on a different laptop if. Yeah, but I think it's quite big. I can log into my, can I log into my OneDrive from there? Just pull it up? Yeah. Let's try that. That might be the easiest. This can go somewhere else. Oh, no. This one? Do you have another
yeah.
port? I do. Good.
Do you want to log in on mine?
Sure. Might be worth it to just use your laptop. Yeah.
It's your OneDrive, you said, right?
No, yeah, it would be like my best.
Oh, OneDrive.
Oh, it's working.
Oh, yeah, look at
Somehow.
that.
You just gotta go.
There we go.
There you go. Just
Oh,
stay here.
nice.
Just press next.
Now I gotta remember my passwords. All good?
Good. Okay.
We're back, we're back.
That was stressful. People ask me if I get nervous talking in a group, and my answer is no. I get more nervous about the tech setup. That's the part that's the most stressful always. But thank you for inviting me. I was really excited when I got the invitation to speak with you, and yeah, I guess happy 2025. I think I'm the first speaker, so yeah, thanks for inviting me. Today I'm going to be talking about natural stream channel design, and I'm going to introduce a little bit in general what that is, and then I'll use it to talk a little bit about some upcoming projects that we have on McMaster's campus. So just a quick show of hands, are there any other geomorphologists in the room? No? Maybe one? I'm usually the only one, so not surprised. But I'm guessing a lot of people here like rivers. So, yeah, so that's all you need for this talk. So I'm going to start off by just talking about the idea of healthy rivers and what I mean when I say fluvial geomorphology. I know it's a very intimidating sounding word. Basically means studying the physical aspects of a river. So hydrologists focus on the water and how the water is moving through the system. Ecologists might focus on different habitats and the biota that live there. A geomorphologist studies the physical components. So what sediments in the river, how wide is the river, how deep is it, and sort of those physical properties and how those change over time, which we'll talk a lot about in the context of urban rivers. But before we get into an urban environment, I wanted to share a photo of a pretty natural, undisturbed environment so we can all see what a natural system or a natural river might look like, or what we might call a healthy river. So we can see that the river is quite wide. It's not very deep in that if the water level went up, you'd get flooding pretty quickly. So it has a lot of, we call that access to the floodplains. And we have a lot of vegetation on either side. So this is sort of typically what we would see pre-urbanization. And I start with this because you'll start to notice patterns when I start showing photos of urban rivers. But when we say healthy rivers, what does that mean in the context of geomorphology? It means that rivers are in balance, and this is basically Geomorphology 101, so you've basically done a geomorphology lesson if you learn about this balance here. This is called Lane's balance, and it's the guiding sort of framework that we use to think about rivers. So how do rivers determine how wide and deep they are? Well, they're basically in this balance. And on the one side, I'm going to start with the right-hand side, we have the amount of flow. Obviously, rivers with more water will be larger. And we have the slope, so how steep the water is. That side kind of represents the amount of energy that we have in the water that's flowing. And then on the left-hand side, we have the amount of sediment, which is usually our QS. So how much sediment is in the water and how big is that sediment? And basically the river is going to adjust its shape and size so that it can transport a certain amount of sediment that will keep its shape stable. That's what we mean by imbalance. And if any one of those four things changes, the river is going to adjust its shape to reach a new balance. So there, everyone's a fluvial geomorphologist now, to some capacity. So let's talk now about urban rivers. And I'm going to talk about what's called the urban stream syndrome, which is a set of symptoms that we see in urban rivers. And they're so common globally all around the world that it's been given this name. So in these symptoms, we have increased magnitude and frequency of flooding. We see channels become wider and deeper. That's that geomorphology part of it. We see a reduction of channel complexity, and what I mean by that is we start to see a loss of a lot of different habitats. The rivers start to look very monotonous and kind of a straight, single channel. We have poor water quality. That all leads to a deterioration of ecological health. And most of our models think that's going to be made even worse with climate change. And a lot of studies have shown that urbanization changes river systems more drastically than any other human activity. So this is more than agriculture, more than climate change, more than anything. That urban landscape is really a very, very big impact on our river systems. And why might we care about the urban stream syndrome? I know everyone in this room is probably part of this club because they care about the natural environment, but even from an urban perspective, these impacts lead to multi-millions, billions-dollar issues. So when a river becomes wider, that means it's eroding. So we lead to a lot of erosion. We have a lot of flooding. We can see these images from floods in Toronto. And what's interesting is that I put this header because it says it happens time and time again. And that means that, maybe we're not managing it very well, or we don't know how to prevent it from happening. So it's still an ongoing problem. And of course, we can study this urban stream syndrome from the hydrology, geomorphology. We can look at water chemistry. A lot of ecologists look at it. We can even study it from an urban development, so a lot of planners look at it. But obviously, my research focuses mostly on the geomorphology, a little bit on the hydrology side. So why does urbanization affect rivers so much? Most of it is that we're changing our landscape, so we're going from a surface that can absorb water. So in this top left, we have a countryside. Most of the rainwater, so I think it says 95% is actually infiltrated in the soil, and only 5% makes it to the river. Once we have farmland, we get a little bit less infiltration, but still the majority of the water is being infiltrated. But then once we start getting to the bottom two, which is suburban and urban, we see a flip, and most of our water is being delivered to to our streams. So that's why we have an increase in how much water is going in. So that increase of paved surfaces is going to increase how much water we have. Because we have a lot of water, we built really efficient storm sewers, which made things even worse because now everything is going to the creek very, very fast. That means we're getting less sediment going in the creek. And remember, that's going to affect that other side of the balance. We need some sediment coming in. And because we like our roads and bridges to be straight, we've also straightened a lot of our rivers artificially, which makes them steeper, which again is going to affect that balance. Just to show the magnitude of change in the hydrology, these are a hydrograph, so it's showing over time the water level in 3 different creeks in the 3 different colors. And these are in 3 adjacent watersheds, so these are right beside each other in Toronto. One of them is completely urban, which is in the blue, and you can see how much higher that peak flood flow is. The green one is a natural, undeveloped system, which sadly is being developed currently. So it will no longer look like this very shortly. And then in blue, we have one with stormwater management, which I will talk a little bit more later. But I wanted to focus on that urban peak. We can see our flood happens much quicker, so there's less of a lag time between the rainfall and the peak flow. Obviously, we have a huge increase in peak flows, and the water goes up and down very fast. So each of those data points is only 2 minutes apart. So you can imagine that in 20 minutes, the water has gone from base flow to basically a flood. Okay, so let's think about this like geomorphologists. What does this do to our creek? Well, we have more water. We have a steeper slope because we've straightened our rivers. We have less sediment, so this balance is going to dip really far to the right. And that means that that little arrow is going to show or predict that we have degradation. That means we're going to start eroding away and making our channel bigger because the river wants to reach that balance. And that's exactly what we see. This is a conceptual model of river degradation. In stage 1 is a natural river. Then usually we start with deepening, so rivers will become deeper, then they become wider, and then eventually over time, they'll stabilize again. So the river will always reach that new balance, but it's going to be a much larger river that might not support our ecological needs that we want, or might be causing problems for infrastructure. And this is what that looks like. So you can see, compared to our natural river that we saw at the beginning, that top photo, it's a lot deeper. You can start to see those roots are being exposed because the river is incising downwards. You can see that it's disconnecting from the floodplain, so now you need much more water to go into the floodplain. And in the bottom photo, you can see that widening. So that pipe with the little concrete structure at the end, that's where the creek's edge used to be. So that's the concrete culvert pipe when it was first installed in, I believe, 1958 in this creek in Toronto. And you can see that the creek has almost doubled in width and just completely ripped it out. So that's that widening part. So when people say erosion is a problem, it's really a geomorphology problem. It's a balance problem between how much water, how much slope we have, and how much sediment we have. So how can we fix this? We know that rivers want to be in that balance. So we have 2 options that we can do. The first one is we can say, this is a situation we're in, the river wants to be bigger, let's just make it bigger, but make it stable to suit our needs. So let's adapt the river to this new balance, kind of speeding up that natural process. Or we can try to rebalance it ourselves. And we have a few tools that we can use to do that. So I'm going to talk about both of those strategies a little bit more. So the first one is river restoration. We have more water, we have more slope, we know our river is going to expand. Let's try to kind of get ahead of it and build a system that's going to be stable. So we've been actually doing this since the beginning of urbanization. You can see in the far left, that's sort of the prehistoric river restoration model. Back then, engineers sort of ruled the domain of the river world in urban areas, and their main focus was drainage. They thought water's bad, it has to be off our roads, has to be off our parking lots. What's the most efficient way to flow water? Well, you can make a concrete trapezoid, a really giant one, and just, you know, hope for the best that all the water gets pulled through. And that was actually the case for a very long time. How many people have seen these in their neighborhood? They're pretty much everywhere. And then in the 1990s, 2000s, we started to switch a little bit, and people started thinking, you know, one, they're kind of ugly. Maybe we can make better park spaces, take advantage of our natural rivers. And two, maybe we can do better. Maybe we can start to, sorry, I thought that was my phone, because I have the same alarm sound. Maybe we can start to also improve the ecology and maybe have a little bit more benefit. Maybe we don't want to just have concrete ditches everywhere. So we started playing around with what's called form-based restoration, where we would look at a natural river and try to mimic it in the urban area. So we would try to build these little habitat units, put in vegetation, and kind of copy the form. And now we've sort of moved into this realm of process-based restoration, which is the gold standard, which is what we call natural channel design, where we're trying to actually not just recreate the form, but recreate the processes and that balance. So I guess in a short way to summarize it is that the intent is to work with natural processes to improve the geomorphic condition and enhance river recovery rather than simply treating the symptoms. So that's sort of, you know, what we're aiming for. And what kind of things can we do? Well, the first and foremost is reconnecting that floodplain. So this is very common. This actually helps with natural flood control because that's what a floodplain is. It's nature's way of handling larger flows. So you can see on the left, there's a photo of an urban creek, which is the before. We can see that deepening. You can see those roots being exposed. And then after restoration, they've lowered it and sort of made it more natural, more of that earlier photo that we saw. And you can see on the right-hand side, this is an example from Milwaukee, which is a very dense urban area. They actually restored this channel. This used to also be a concrete ditch, and they've made it, you know, this nice meandering channel. But what's really impressive is they've given it a pretty big floodplain, which you can see in the brown area. And these areas are usually then vegetated. Sometimes they'll put in little wetlands. So they actually have a really big ecological benefit, but they also provide that natural stormwater control. You'll notice the one challenge with this in urban areas is space. In a lot of older neighborhoods, we've built right up to the creek. There's not really a lot of space to build a floodplain, and that's really the biggest challenge, and we'll come back to that at the end. What else can we do? We can make rivers wiggly again. So remember I talked about straightening them was one of the problems. We've actually started, you know, there's a phrase where we re-wiggling the rivers. People actually use that. And this helps a lot because it reduces the slope, so it helps restore that geomorphic balance, but it also introduces the opportunity for bigger habitat diversity because different organisms will like to live in different parts. Because as the water flows through those meanders, it has different hydraulic conditions, so it's gonna have different habitats available. And the most common restoration design that we use is called pools and riffles. This is these geomorphic units that we put in where we have these shallower, steeper riffles. You can see that in the side view. And then we have these less steep pools that have deeper water, and then we alternate between them. These are very, very popular for two reasons. One, they're very stable in nature, so natural pool rivers have been found to be extremely stable, so that's kind of a benefit. And two, they're great ecologically because the riffles and the pools have very different environments. You can have a lot of different species that can thrive in them. So how many people have seen rivers probably that look like this, where they have a fast-moving part and then a slow-moving part and then fast and then slow? A lot of people, now you know what they're called. You can impress your friends. Say those are pools and riffles. However, because we're in urban areas, we can't really have the dream of just letting the river do what it wants. We still have to protect infrastructure like roads and bridges. We have to protect property. So we do still have to sometimes put in structures to protect the banks from erosion. but maybe we don't have to use concrete like in the olden days. Now, very commonly, we use what's called vegetated ripraps. We put these large boulders for protection that are then vegetated. Or more recently, people have been really big fans of using wood. Wood has the added benefit that as it decays, it also provides nutrients. It can provide habitat cover. It's a really great material actually to use for restoration. Another really fun one is beavers can do the work for us, which is kind of fun, but you can see in the bottom diagram from left to right, in the leftmost area we have that typical urban river. It's very narrow and deep and straight. And you can see that the beavers have built 2 dams, and over time those dams cause the river to become more wiggly and to become wider and to kind of create a floodplain, and suddenly you have a wetland and all this stuff, and all you had to do was just ship them over and they kind of did everything for you. So that's been very, very popular actually, is reintroducing beaver populations in a lot of areas. But you'd be surprised, I've worked in rivers in the middle of Scarborough, middle of suburbs, and there's so many beavers there already. So a lot of times they're seen as pests, but they can actually be, you know, our best allies. In fact, they're so good at this that we now create artificial beaver dams. So the picture on the top right is what's called a beaver dam analog. So people actually will go out and they'll build, you know, replica fake beaver dams because they are so effective. Sorry, I wanted to finish off by, so if you Google a beautiful river, these are the types of photos that come up. We see these kind of, you know, they're very clean, the water's flowing very gently, there's not too much vegetation or wood in it. But I did want to remind people that natural rivers don't look like that. Natural rivers have wood in them. Natural rivers might have multiple threads and they're not this perfect little, you know, sinusoidal shape. And we actually had a wonderful guest speaker, Ellen Wool, come in and she gave a whole talk about how messy rivers are healthy rivers and talking about all the biological and nutrient and hydrological benefits of adding, you know, more complexity. So a lot of natural channel design is moving towards this direction. You know, we're trying to replicate nature's processes, and those are messy sometimes. We have wood, which the cities hate. Wood is always removed from rivers, but there's a big push to reintroduce wood. So how are we doing? Report card time. We've been doing this for maybe, I'd say 25, 30 years. We're doing okay. The issue is we lack a lot of long-term monitoring because this is a newer thing. We don't always know how these projects are working long-term. When they're built, companies are only by policy required to monitor for, I think, 2 years post-construction, which is really nothing in a river's lifespan. You might not even get a flood in 2 years to really see what's happening. So how are we doing? We're not sure. There's variable success. We've had a lot of amazing success stories and a lot of failures, unfortunately, but we can learn from those. And there's still a bit of a lack of tools for incorporating geomorphic processes in these river restoration designs. A lot of times they're done more by what people think will work versus what's, you know, scientific evidence for, and that's kind of what I try to focus my research on. And I wanted to highlight that probably through this talk you've gathered yourself that natural channel design is inherently a very complicated, I guess, endeavor and inherently very interdisciplinary. So obviously geomorphologists, ecologists, and civil engineers often work together to create these projects because you need all 3 of those to really make the best outcome. Okay, enough about just river restoration. Let's zoom all the way back. We had a second option to fix urban rivers, and that was to rebalance our balance. So maybe we can address the problem. Maybe we can reduce some of that excess runoff, and that's where stormwater management comes in. That was the whole idea of stormwater management, is maybe we can prevent some of this erosion by just preventing how much water, or controlling how much water is going in. And stormwater management has been a standard. It's in the Ontario code now since the 90s, so any new neighborhood built has to have stormwater management. Unfortunately, older neighborhoods don't. And they mostly focus on flood control. So yes, the idea is our balance is tilted to the right. Maybe if we can reduce some of the water, it can tilt back into a balance. And that's where this third orange hydrograph comes in, which I skipped over, but that is the hydrograph in a creek that has stormwater management ponds. So you can see that it did a very good job at reducing the peak. So our flood is much smaller. The water level doesn't go nearly as high as the urban case. But you'll notice it has this very long, elevated kind of duration. So the flood lasts a lot longer. And that actually has shown to have some limitations and some problems. So it can actually lead to very poor water quality. Another issue is water temperature. These things get really hot in the summer because the water sits in there, and then when it actually does flood and the water drains out, you can put your hand in these creeks and it's like bath water. It's really gross. So that's an issue with them. But they are pretty ubiquitous, so almost everywhere has them. I'm sure a lot of people live in neighborhoods where they have this scene somewhere in their neighborhood with a stormwater pond. To fix some of these issues, we've moved on to things like low impact development or restoring or creating artificial wetlands as well. So this idea is instead of just trapping all the water in one place, maybe we can actually try to mimic nature's ability to infiltrate that water. So we're adding in things like rain gardens or bioswales or infiltration trenches, and a lot of times these are city projects. The city of Hamilton actually has a few. If you go on their stormwater management website, they actually talk about some low impact development projects that they've completed or are ongoing. A lot of people actually build these in their own yards as well. They'll build little rain gardens or whatnot. The picture on the bottom left is showing one of those bioswales. So this is at the end of a parking lot. Instead of the water just going straight into drainage, it's kind of being infiltrated in this little area. The picture on the right is an artificial wetland that's kind of behind a bunch of houses. And we have a third option. Maybe we can balance the other side of the scale. Remember, we can also play with the amount and the size of the sediment. So some people have been playing with this idea that, remember, the balance is tilted to the right, so we want to add more sediment to our river to balance it, to bring that scale down. So people have been playing around with actually artificially adding more sediment to the creek to try to rebalance this. And this sounds crazy, but it's actually something that's done downstream of dams. So dams also block sediment coming through, so you get a lot of erosion downstream of dams. So people go with trucks, like in this photo, and they'll just dump tons and tons of sediment in the creeks to prevent that erosion. And people have started thinking, can we maybe use this in urban rivers? Unfortunately, it's still a bit in the experimental stage. There's a lot of questions like, where would we put the sediment and where would it end up? Or how much do we need to put in? Or does channel geometry have an effect? So if I put it in the straight part or in the wiggly part, will it make a difference? The answer is we're still learning about that. So I've actually worked on a set of experiments that studied this exactly. So we built an artificial river, which you can see on the left, and it feeds sediment at the top, and we studied how the sediment would move downstream. But it hasn't been applied. There's one project in British Columbia that was just built that are testing this out. And we actually did a scaled model of it to help inform their design. So it's really exciting, but it's not really something that's currently available, but maybe in the future. Okay, so now that we're all geomorphology experts, my little video decided to play. That's a picture of the sediment moving over time. So let's apply all our geomorphology knowledge to a local creek. So So this is Ancaster Creek. Ancaster Creek is a tributary of Spencer Creek, and it runs, starts off in Dundas Valley, and it runs through campus, and it runs right by the parking lots of McMaster, and then it joins Spencer Creek really close to the mouth. And Ancaster Creek is almost like a miniature perfect study of the urban stream syndrome because it's experiencing all of those symptoms that I talked about. So I actually take my students out there and we talk about that. So we have increased runoff from paved surfaces, especially by campus. It's just parking lots everywhere, right by the creek. We have efficient storm systems to help keep those parking lots and roads dry. We have decreased sediment delivery because we've paved everything, and we've straightened the creek. This isn't the best photo, but it's the only one I could find. So this is a Google Earth image with a 1950s topographic map on top. And you can actually see the creek used to wiggle through that area, but because they built the parking lot, they straightened it almost completely into two sections. And you'll see a map later that maybe shows it a bit better. But talking about urban stream syndrome, we have the perfect recipe. We have more water, we have more slope, our creek's gonna be tilted way to the right. And that's exactly what we see. We see increased magnitudes of flooding, we see channel widening and deepening, reduction in channel complexity, poor water quality, and loss of ecological health. I put this photo here, it's a little awkward because it's me and my students, but I wanted to put it to show the background is Ancaster Creek. And maybe now people can pick apart and see that maybe it's not a river in balance and not healthy. You can see the creek is very deep. You can see those roots are being exposed. It means that we have a lot of that erosion problem. And it's funny because people often ask me, like, oh, does this creek seem okay to you? And those are the things I look for, is evidence of a creek not being in balance. So McMaster has been working to try to restore Ancaster Creek through West Campus. This is a photo of a concept, so this is not a design drawing. The restoration project isn't at that stage, but this was done by a company who was just kind of giving McMaster ideas of what maybe it could look like. So it's just a concept to show some ideas. We can see in blue is where the creek runs now. You can see right when it hits the parking lot, it then kind of just goes kind of very straight. And you can see that the pink line is where the creek used to run before the parking lots were built. So you can definitely see that straightening and that loss of that complexity. And then the green line is sort of a proposed, maybe we could go back to that. Maybe we can re-wiggle our river. Here's another photo of what that might look like, including sort of a cross-section view where we would have our creek, and they would bring the floodplain down. So remember where we want to connect that floodplain. And they've also proposed ideas of maybe adding some wetlands as well to act, to infiltrate some of that water. But this is sort of the concept of what it might look like. And I'm sure the first thing that pops up for everyone is, what about the parking lots? And that's exactly McMaster's issue as well. That's our biggest holdup, is actually finding all those spots that are going to be lost. If this is done, will have to be relocated.
Maybe we should build an LRT.
Yeah, maybe we should. It's a great point. But I think it's actually an interesting case study because it highlights the issue that a lot of river restoration projects face. So space becomes the major concern. And it's one of those where cities sometimes want everything. They're like, well, we want this restoration project, we want it to be nice, but we also want to keep the parking lot. And it's, it can be very challenging sometimes to balance those different competing sort of needs. And I just wanted to take a moment to do a little self-promotion, but McMaster also received some funding through a very gracious donation to use this opportunity to build an outdoor lab as well. So we've started this initiative called the Watershed Ecosystems Living Lab, or WELL. So we're using this funding that came our way to buy a bunch of instrumentation that we're going to use to measure sort of the condition of the creek before and then hopefully during and after restoration, and use it really as a teaching tool. So the idea is to be able to have students go down to West Campus, collect data, see how things are working. It's a really awesome opportunity because it's right on campus, which is oftentimes the challenge with field trips is the logistical side, so this makes it really exciting. So yeah, if people have ideas and things for well, it is, we're just gonna start putting instrumentation in the ground in the spring, so we are quite excited. So we're gonna be putting in some gauges, a meteorological station, some soil moisture probes. So we're gonna try to, some sediment traps, we're gonna try to kind of monitor all aspects of the creek. So that's kind of a fun upcoming project. So that's sort of everything I had. I wanted to finish off by going back to the title, which was what do urban creeks want? Well, urban creeks want what all creeks want, which is basically to be in balance. I know like I'm anthropomorphizing them. They obviously don't want things, but you know, in physics, in nature, those are the driving and resisting forces that are trying to sort of come to an equilibrium. So in that sense, we can think of urban rivers as rivers that are in disequilibrium, but they ultimately want to be in equilibrium. And we have a bunch of tools that we can use to kind of help them get there. So that was everything I had for today. Hopefully that, yeah. Hopefully people enjoyed the little geomorphology lecture and I can take questions. You guys are like my students, very shy to ask questions. I'll take one over there.
Ooh, I feel like I'm a lounge singer back here.
Oh.
If anybody has questions, I've got a mic, so I'll bring it over to you so you don't have to yell and scream.
I think someone over there did.
There we go.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. And which stream is it in Toronto that you say is at risk of development?
That one is, it's called Gannettsakegan Creek. It's a tributary of Duffins, if people are familiar. It's in the city of Pickering, actually. And they have a really big development. It's called the Seton Lands. It's kind of in northern Pickering. That, when I started my PhD, it was all farmland or forest. And now it's already all, I mean, I say already, but it's been a while, but still, now it's completely clear cut and they've been building suburbs there.
Just a quick second question. Are you hopeful that with the emphasis now on Shadow Creek, that the dredging, and it's going to lead to a new appreciation of the value of Shadow Creek and possibly we'll see some improvements upstream?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with what's going on in Shadow Creek, but I think that any efforts to improve it, I guess you'd see benefits both upstream and downstream. Yeah.
In your work, if you, or anywhere within the community, has there been any effort to grade or establish a measurement of degradation, different levels of degradation in creeks?
Yeah, so we have a few tools to do that. I showed the most basic framework, which we call the channel evolution model, which was showing those steps. And that started off as a conceptual framework, but people have actually tried to quantify it. So the idea is if you measure the width and depth, the ratio between the channel width to the depth, or you measure the bank angles, or you can measure the rate of erosion, you can kind of put numbers to it and you can help establish sort of where along the evolution continuum you are. So yeah, but it's difficult because there's also so many confounding factors, like depending on, but we're trying. We as a community, we're trying.
Do you have any thoughts or information or scuttlebutt on the Don River work and the impact of the, what I assume was a 100-year storm or something like that? I mean, is that project total, or did it do some of what it was supposed to do?
Are you talking about, I'm guessing the mouth of the Don that they're...
As I understand it, they tried to introduce wiggles and trickles and things into the Don, which was previously a smooth river, and I've seen the destruction around the
Yeah.
brickworks, so, and I saw
Yeah, so that photo is a pre-restoration photo. So that was the 2013 floods. That was the very famous July floods. That was before the restoration. And yeah, the Don River has had a history of trouble with flooding. I don't believe the project is completely complete yet. I think there's still ongoing reconstruction, but I am hopeful for it. There's been a lot of really great both modeling work and kind of conceptual work that's been done to make sure that it can handle a lot bigger flooding volumes and things like that. And the design was it has been very carefully thought out, so I am both impressed by it and quite hopeful. It's kind of the biggest project of its kind in Toronto. I don't think the city's seen anything like it, so yeah, I'm hopeful it'll be good. But again, it'll take some time to really get that feedback and that monitoring for it.
Great talk. I have a question to look at it a little bigger. I guess my question is, what did your results show as sort of a successful plan, a successful way to go forward? And then what do you think the challenges may be in scaling it up? Are you worried about it may work on a small scale and then the larger scale up, but then when you actually do it in a real river? So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the issue of scaling is always a problem with lab experiments. But we do have some success stories from, like I said, in cases where they've put them in dams. So we do know that our results, they're not completely wrong. We do have some evidence. We also can compare what the end result of our model looks to what the natural creek looks and how we expect it to behave, and we do have pretty good results for that. In terms of feasibility, we have done some calculations based on our model results of how much sediment you would need, how costly that would be, and how often you'd need. And we actually found that the cost was less than doing works that they're currently doing. So over the long term, it would actually save the city money because those emergency erosion control works are very, very costly. So we are hopeful. I think it hasn't been tried too much because the city doesn't want to try this new thing that might work or might not work. We've been very lucky in British Columbia with that one project that they have been trying it out. But again, that was completed a year and a half ago, so we don't really know yet how it's performing. But yes, our results do show promising results that adding sediment can improve sort of the natural erosion control because you're reducing that kind of imbalance that's there. So we do have, some promising results. We'll see.
And just quickly, where has that been published?
We have just submitted it. So, so the two photos I shouldn't say that. So the models of the creeks in Toronto have been published, and then the creek in British Columbia, that one we're just in the process of publishing it now.
Thank you.
We have lots of time, so I saw a couple more hands over here, and I haven't gotten all my steps today, so I'll make my way eventually, but I'll kind of cross over here, but there's a couple hands I think on the side here.
Yeah, excellent talk. Also, I'm part of Dundas Turtle March, and there's a lot of turtles that come up out of the creek exactly in that parking lot. I've seen a lot of daily eggs there. So I know you're not the ecology side of it, but are you looking at making sure that when you revamp some of these streams that you are looking at what's in those streams, that you're providing the right habitat? Because the hatchling, well, when the turtle comes out to nest, it has to come up on a sunny bank that it can actually lay its eggs in, which is usually a fine gravel. So obviously when we channelize anything and we put concrete in, we take all that away.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I put in that Venn diagram where ecologists are definitely part of the team when these projects come in. And a lot of times those ecological goals are built into the design. So we know that, like you mentioned, different species need, even during the different life cycles, will need different substrate material, or we know that different fish will spawn at different flow velocities and depths. So we try to design the creeks to kind of incorporate all those things. And I'm gonna go back to that idea of complexity and those messy rivers. Remember, I talked about how natural rivers, you know, have all this natural variability in how wide they are and where there's sand versus gravel, and you know, they're not all uniform all the way down. And that complexity is what allows, as you mentioned, things like turtle habitat to have available habitat at different times of their life cycle. So this move towards making creeks less simple and adding in that complexity, I think, is in that, I guess, is a way to move towards that goal that you mentioned of making sure that we do have that diversity in habitat. So yes, I think we are moving that way. Whether we're always successful, again, we don't always know, because again, we don't have a lot of monitoring data, unfortunately. So a lot of times these projects are built and they'll boast like, oh, we improved red-side dace habitat, or oh, we improved salamander habitat, but then we don't have a lot of data actually afterwards. But that is sort of the goal always. So yes, whoever designs the Ancaster Creek project, that would be sort of one of the goals that goes into the designs.
I actually kind of just have a follow-up on that too, related to species and this monitoring, this data that you have. Do you rely on other groups that can help provide some of that data for you for like certain species? Because that is a hot topic right now with a lot of these highways and 413 and
Yeah.
the red-side dace in particular.
Yeah, so
How is
actually,
that being monitored, if at all?
actually the ecology side's monitored better than the geomorphology part. I'd say the hydrology's monitored the best. Geomorphology's never monitored almost ever. So I do find that there are oftentimes, you know, like fish samples or benthic samples in a lot of places. A lot of conservation authorities will do these on a regular basis. But we have a lot of geomorphology monitoring data missing. So we don't have a lot of data on the substrate details. So I don't focus on the ecology, so I'm not aware of a lot of possible data sets that might be out there. But yeah, in terms of geomorphology, there's nothing, which is a problem. But yeah, if people want to volunteer to go out and measure stuff, that would be great.
Yeah, hi, thank you for the great talk. I have about 17 questions, so I'll try to get one and three here. During your talk about actually like curing the urban stream syndrome, I think you called it, you outlined two basic scenarios. One being at the stream itself, like physically altering it with natural stream channel design. But then the second part that you went over briefly was the stormwater management part. And I'd like to know your thoughts specifically on what role you think green stormwater infrastructure in low impact development at any scale has on river systems. Because there's going to be a massive amount of rivers that need help and a very small amount of rivers that actually get help. So what do you think the role, you know, low impact development can play in that?
I actually have a student doing a project on that exactly. So I like the train of thought. But the idea is that it can be quite substantial. So as I mentioned, land use change and urbanization is the single biggest impact on river systems. I had a student who did some modeling of how urbanization versus climate change projections would affect storms, and the climate change projections actually were completely overshadowed by the urban development. So that the change in the imperviousness is the single biggest contributor, which is you can see it as an unfortunate thing, but you can also see it as a benefit that means that making even small changes could potentially have a big impact because the system is very sensitive and does respond a lot to that change in land use. So I actually have a current student who's looking at some of the actual planned low-impact development projects in Hamilton, and she's putting them into the model to see how it affects the geomorphic stability of the channels. So it is an ongoing question, especially when you scale up to a watershed scale. So a lot of studies have been just on single, little sections of the creek that might be next to a restored wetland. But then if you scale it up, which is more to your question, larger scale, where can we put these to have the biggest impact? That's sort of an ongoing question. But a lot of the ongoing research and literature and the work we've done suggests that it can make a very, very big difference.
I've heard comments about you asking us to do work for you. You're talking with grad students now. Sorry, my name's Sheila. My question is about the grad students and what opportunities you want. Because I know we are involved in a club that has about 1,000 acres nearby, some within walking distance of the college, of the university, by the way. So if you're looking for site visits, I know one sanctuary nearby that has a creek that is, I think, fairly healthy. I don't think it's been too modified. It's 100-foot gully, so I don't think humans have done that. Just wanted you to know that you might want to think about your grad students and talking to people from coming to masters.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'll do a pitch now. I have a student who's with parameters and see, how accurate they can measure things with little training, and just to get an idea of how citizen science can be incorporated. So maybe when we do our recruitment phase, I can send out the email if there's people in this room who want to volunteer to be part of that. That would be great.
Fantastic talk, Elli. Really exciting. And I just love how, they use the term, what does creeks want? It's all about the energy flow, so it's very clear they do want certain things. I was really intrigued by the messy stream or the messy creek concept, and just thinking about a creek like Ancaster Creek on campus. I know I haven't been there for a year or so, but there, because of the erosion, there's pretty large trees that drop into the creek. And I think you were, it won't be a universal comment, but those kind of trees are part of that messiness. Because I think the reaction usually is to remove them, to allow flow to happen, and not to cut into the bank or whatever way the flow is going. But can you explain a bit more about that? Because again, the idea is to remove them right away. And I think you're talking about something different.
Yeah, so wood is a huge component of natural rivers in their geomorphology and ecology. So wood in rivers has a lot of functions. It can increase erosion in some areas. It can actually help store sediment in other areas. It can cause the river to change direction if you get a large enough log jam happening. And these are all natural processes that add to that complexity that we talked about, that add different habitat and things. So it's been identified as a very crucial part of a river environment and ecosystem in the natural world. But you're right, the wood is usually removed from rivers by cities in very large amounts, I think for two reasons. The first one is cities like predictability and the idea that a log jam might form and then we might get some flooding or erosion. That adds a bit of uncertainty, and I don't think cities either like that or have tools to handle that with current river management, sort of what's normal for river management. The second one is, I think, optics. So I think people think wood is ugly. So I showed those two pictures of the Google images. When you Google beautiful river, you see these perfect creeks with no wood in them. And that's, what we consider to be a beautiful creek, but that's not real life. That's like a manicured, it's almost like calling a golf course, a beautiful, natural system. It's not, it's a manicured environment. And Dr. Ellen Wool, who actually did a lot of work in that messiness of rivers theme. She actually did a study where she got public opinion on wood in rivers and found that even the public, they, you know, we've been trained to see wood as ugly or bad or dirty or in rivers. So I think for those two reasons, we've had the tendency to remove it in large amounts and with little thought. I actually went to the city of Toronto and asked if they had records of when they removed wood and how much, just to do an inventory, and they said, oh, we don't keep record of that. The team just comes in and pulls it out, whatever. I think that's changing a little bit now. Like I mentioned, a lot of natural channel design now relies on actually putting wood in on purpose in channels, so I think there is a bit of a shift, but yeah, it's challenging. Yeah.
All right, we'll stay in the middle for a bit here.
Just to answer one of the comment, I just made a comment on one of the things about monitoring. I think you'll find that with, especially with red side days, maybe the rare species stuff, anybody that's doing natural channel design on those systems, the monitoring requirements are 5 to 10 years. So you'll get pretty
Yeah.
detailed, and you get good data on stuff too.
Yeah.
It's not just species stuff. So there's a number of systems in place.
I was going to say, yeah, that you're correct. There are projects with longer monitoring. The problem is that they're sparse and it's not consistent. To really learn what's working and not working, we really ideally should be monitoring every project. I know it's a resource issue. It can be costly to be sending out crews to measure things, but that is, yeah, because you're right, we do have a lot more data on red side dace habitat just because there's been more funding and a focus on that. Yeah, but.
So my question relates more to sort of a big question, but I live way upstream in Ancaster Creek in Ancaster. Sorry. I live upstream in Ancaster itself, near a section of Ancaster Creek that's going through the same sort of thing. I mean, Ancaster is an open area, no stormwater management, direct runoff, disconnected floodplain, you know, trees all over and tree dams all over the place, real nice. So when you're trying to work downstream and from out, how do you deal with the upstream portions that are complete and and now especially with the densification and all the infilling stuff, like the hard surfaces are going crazy and just waiting on the runoff and nothing's controlled and off into the creek and people still at the downstream end.
Yeah, you hit on another big challenge of river restoration is that rivers are a continuous system. So anything you do at one location is going to affect the creek both downstream and upstream. It's going to kind of propagate. But funding-wise, river restoration and management projects are usually done on a reach basis, which is usually only a couple 100 meters, maybe 1 or 2 kilometers if you're lucky. And yeah, you're right, you can sometimes put in a restoration project in one place and be like, yay, we did a great job, and then downstream your system gets completely altered. So that is a challenge, definitely. In the case of West Campus, I think it's a little bit easier in that downstream effects don't propagate upstream as much, but eventually, to get the whole river in balance, you'd have to restore, I guess, the entire thing, which is obviously not possible. So part of river restoration design is working within those limitations. So if you know that upstream you have these constraints, you're going to have this discharge coming in, you're going to have to modify your design to sort of account for that. But yeah, in a perfect world, we'd restore the entire watershed if we could. Yeah, and yeah, and that is an issue. Even those concrete channels I showed, those were built, let's say, in the 50s, but they didn't really anticipate, you know, the future effects. So a lot of these have actually been eroded and destroyed, and a lot of sewer pipes that are buried underneath have become exposed just because that intensification piece wasn't accounted for. I think in the designs they do talk about it. Even back then it was known, but I just think the magnitude of how much the cities have grown and intensified wasn't anticipated always. Yeah. So.
I was actually going to say a little bit of the opposite. That Ancaster Creek and then its tributary Coldwater Creek, a big part of that goes out into all sections of Ancaster. There's a meadow
Yeah, so that's a great question. So as you mentioned, because Ancaster Creek has preserved a bit of a corridor at least, it's not, urbanized the entire extent. A lot of our work shows it is in a little bit better shape than some other creeks that, haven't had the same luck. But as I mentioned previously, anything that happens upstream will impact downstream. So even if you're walking through Mac Forest and that section looks very pristine, that section is still adjusting and altering to the increased flows from whatever neighborhoods are upstream. Or even those changes in the hydrographs from the stormwater ponds, those still have geomorphic effects. So it's very challenging to sort of isolate the effect of a single section when that section is also adjusting to everything upstream, if that makes sense. But you're right that Ancaster Creek is a little bit better. It's definitely by far not the worst
And I think,
situation.
through that whole valley, there might be a sewer system. And so
Yeah.
along the parking lot, they probably, somewhat straightened, channelized that whole section, kind of pushed it over to the one valley, close to the valley slope. And so, yeah, that creek has been recovering from the channelization effect.
Yeah.
For, 50 years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think most channels don't reach a new equilibrium because they just can't, you've shortened it because you've channelized it, you've taken it off the meander. So, yeah, I guess they don't really recover, right? When you channelize them and straighten them. It's just like Spencer Creek that goes all over these Dundas.
Yeah.
You can just imagine the meander pattern that was part of Spencer Creek, and then they channelized it, put all the spoils up top, cut it off from the floodplain, so yeah, it's a tough thing to do over there.
I would argue that they do reach a new equilibrium, just not one that looks like, they don't recover to what they looked like before. They'll reach a new equilibrium that is in that degraded state, which, won't be suitable for habitat and things like that. But it can also take a long time because someone in a previous question mentioned that moving target idea, that these creeks, they'll build a development, it's adjusting, and before it finishes adjusting, you're building a new development. So it is a moving target. So these creeks appear to just never be in equilibrium, but I think they are all tending towards that. It's just never really reached. But maybe that's a philosophical question about what equilibrium even means and stuff. So.
All right, do you have any questions over on this side here? Yes. We've got a bit more time for a few more too. So, and just a reminder, if you're watching online, drop your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to those as well tonight too.
I was very intrigued with the idea of adding sediment to rivers and getting the equilibrium worked out. I'm also confused. This is kind of a background. I've been sailing from the harbor since I was a kid, and every time there's a big major rainstorm, there's a huge plume of brown water that comes out through paradise. And if we are trying to stabilize our streams by adding sediment to it, doesn't it, and it's still got that, all that water in it, doesn't it just, where does it go?
Great question. That's what our models are for. So I do want to clarify, most of the time when we talk about sediment augmentation, we're adding fairly coarse sediment. So we're talking about gravel to cobbles, so larger material. So we're not adding in silts or anything that's going to be in suspension and make that murky water. The reason for that is that material doesn't affect the geomorphology as significantly, whereas the gravel and that coarser material is really what sets the stability and the shape of the creek. So we are talking about adding in coarser material. So it does obviously propagate downstream, but a lot slower than, I guess, if you put in finer material. What's interesting is we found that we could replicate how natural sediment moves versus our artificial added sediment. And we did find that the geometry, so where the bends are, is kind of the dominant control of where the sediment is going to build, and you're going to get these bars that form and these sections that are stable. But yeah, that is an ongoing question, is where does the sediment go? And that's what we use models for. The project in British Columbia was a little different. They actually built a reconstructed channel and they wanted to add spawning gravel in it at a certain thickness. So they would actually place it over a large section of the channel to try to kind of create an artificial spawning habitat. And our experiments were meant to test, you know, okay, you put it in, but where is it going to go if there's a big flood and things like that? So this is why when I introduced it, it's more of an experimental thing still. We're still kind of testing it out. But it does seem promising that it can be used, to restore habitat and kind of reach that balance. So it's kind of a non-answer, but it's because we don't know yet.
I get it. Is there, you think there'll be a time if you restore our streams that there won't be that big round thing coming into the bay that is keeping that organic matter within the creek system, or?
I'm not sure what you mean. Can you repeat that?
Well, if you, after these significant rainfall, it's just a massive round plume of water
Yeah.
that comes in from there. And it, to me, you just think it's such a shame to see that very rich organic matter being washed away in summer. So I'm just wondering if you can envision a time when we have our creeks at a point that has no longer that kind of vegetation.
Yeah, so some of that is natural, so natural rivers will also transport it. But what you're seeing is you're seeing an increase in the rate of that because you are getting higher flows, so you're losing that fine material much faster. The idea is that if you can restore that sediment balance and maybe add that coarser material in, that you would be kind of mimicking that natural process. So remember I said the goal of natural channel design is to mimic the natural process. So you would ideally be putting it back to a condition where, yeah, you might still have that fine sediment, but it's more at a kind of natural rate that you would expect. So that is, I do envision a time where that will happen. It has happened, so a lot of success stories of restoration projects do measure suspended sediment as well and do see an improvement. So yeah, that's definitely something that is part of the goals oftentimes. Yeah.
I think we have time for a couple more. I see if you're any more just on this side, come over here before I move on. No, going once. Okay.
I wonder if this is not really your scope, but I'm curious about the use of Christmas trees that I know are easy. Okay, it's fine. Go ahead. How do they work and how do they help?
Christmas trees in the creeks, you mean? Yeah, so as I mentioned, I showed a picture. People have been using wood a lot more as a stabilizing material in channels because it is more natural, and as I mentioned, as it decays, it can provide nutrients and also cover. But wood is expensive, so a lot of times, you know, because you have to get almost an entire tree's worth, or they put in root wads, which is actually the entire root part of the tree. It becomes very expensive, and Christmas trees are kind of a cheaper alternative, they're already there kind of thing. I have heard of some projects that use them and get creative. I don't, unfortunately, have a lot of information on their success and what happened, but it is kind of cool to see. Yeah, well, someone behind might.
Yeah, I mean, usually the stream is over widened, you know, it's eroding, and so they pack Christmas trees into the bank, they stake them in with wooden stakes, and it's just a great way for, you know, sediment, you know, soil's been caught in that area and kind of restore the bank, and then you plant vegetation in it and you build it back up. So it's just, you know, a woody material that caps a lot of sediment. Yeah, you know, keep them in that location, but it's also covering natural vegetation.
Yeah, I think this is where it comes down to looking at the goals of each individual project. So if you know that you have brook trout and that is one specific goal, then yeah, maybe the beavers aren't the ideal solution for you. But in a lot of other places, you might not have cold water species and it might be a great opportunity. So of course, we always have to look at the goals and the context of each project, but you're right. So I guess I am a big fan, but you're right, they're not appropriate in every environment, of course.
That's great. Thank you so much. Great questions tonight. Great answers, everyone. This is wonderful conversation. Thank you so much again, Elli, for being with us and joining us tonight. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did too. I think that's all the time we have tonight, but do you have final thoughts?
I have one more announcement that I was meant to put in the presentation and forgot, because I was told by people earlier today. So the university has hired a company to do an initial study of the West Campus project, and as part of that, they'll be reaching out to different stakeholders and groups in the area to get feedback about what they want to see as part of the restoration and get feedback. And they actually identified the Naturalist Club as one of those groups. So just a heads up that I'm not sure the exact timelines, but you might be asked for some ideas or feedbacks of what you might want to see in this restoration project.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.